All right, I'm here with Mr. Ted Benson. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. This is the Design Build show where we're trying to educate folks on design build. And very, very fortunate, I think, the world of this man. This man is pushing our whole industry forward. And it's, know who this man is. Ted Benson, Bensonwood Homes, Unity Homes, Tektoniks. This guy has written several books. He came up from timber frame building. He is on record for the most valuable home ever built in the U.S. in Nantucket. But at the same time, this guy is, that's where part of the thing I think is incredible. You come from that, right? But then he's seeing what needs to be done in this industry, and he is pushing the industry forward to that. And thank you. Just want to thank you to start things out. It's incredible.
Well, that's a generous introduction. I'm not sure
I
deserve all of that.
Well, you do, and then some. And I think your legacy is going to grow over time because you are pushing the industry, and the things you see and are implementing are incredible. So I wanted to just start briefly on your background. I got to know you from a talk you did a few years ago, and then when I was telling some colleagues, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've read all his timber frame books," and so I picked one up, and in the intro or forward, you talk about how you came up as a carpenter, and then you started to you learned the craft of timber frame, then you started to do it. How did you get into design build from that?
Well, I started out doing pretty conventional carpentry.
Okay.
And this was out in Colorado. And I learned then that I liked the process of building, but I also didn't like some of what got built. The standards of building were not particularly high in the tract building and the new parts of the suburban areas where
you told a story they were doing like drywall as plywood, right? They're like, let's just put on the drywall.
Yeah, a lot of shortcuts.
Yeah.
And bad attitudes,
Mm-hmm.
on the part of the carpenters and the builders. They weren't elevated in their thinking, and they certainly weren't elevated in their knowledge about building. And so that might have been an indictment on them, but I actually took it, even as a young carpenter, as an indictment of the industry, that something was missing.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, these people would be more motivated and more interested in bringing the best quality.
Yeah.
But later, I had out here on the East Coast, as I was intending to work my way through school, I had the opportunity to work with some really good craftsmen builders, and kind of saw the other end of the spectrum. And these were the type of builders who would do everything from the foundation to the furniture.
Wow.
And that was a real, almost design build, as they were very connected to the architects who did the work, did the design part, but relied on them for the craft part. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a design build model, as architects kind of knew where the skills were and where the knowledge was, and they didn't kind of overdraw. They
would take it to like schematic design.
Yeah.
And then they would work together a lot on projects, right?
Yeah.
So it was like a design build team.
Yes. Yeah. On one of those early projects, I noted that there was this common reference to what we called Wooj, which was W-O-O-J.
On the plans.
On the plans, there were notations all over. Wooj, with an arrow to it. And basically it meant work out on job.
Yeah.
And that was kind of funny at the time for me, but it was really the architect relying on the skills of the craftsman.
Right. But it was set up that way. It wasn't like, I think folks like verify and feel that can be joked as like, oh, he's just not taking any responsibility. But that's how it was set up as a design build team.
Right.
The architect there was just acknowledging the craftsman, more or less, right?
Exactly, and they were more connected.
Yeah.
You hear stories about Frank Lloyd Wright's work. You know, that was the same. That he really relied on the skills of good craftsmen to execute his projects. It wasn't the brilliance of the architect by himself. It was an architect,
Right.
you know, together with the skills of people actually doing the work. And so later, as I got into timber framing and really wanted to revive the craft of timber framing as a way to elevate the process and embed craftsmanship with the building product, you know, I realized.
Why did you see that in timber framing specifically?
Because, you know, what I learned about timber framing here on the East Coast, it really didn't exist in Colorado.
Okay. So that was the change you saw.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I saw, you know, the old buildings in Concord, Massachusetts, and Lexington, and Carlisle, and then here in New Hampshire, and Walpole, and Keene, and Westmoreland, and Alstead, this area that we live in right here. And you know, that place, Concord, New Hampshire, or Concord, Massachusetts, and Walpole, New Hampshire, as examples, are still defined by the timber frame buildings that are really iconic and are still used and preserved and loved and actually define the architecture of the town. And say, well, that's pretty sustainable.
Yeah.
And so my question, you know, as I was discovering this, was why did it die? You know, what's wrong with it?
Yeah.
And the answer was, it's too labor intensive and requires too much skill. But as a young idealistic carpenter in my 20s,
That was perfect.
you know, I said, well, but this is the 1970s, and we have new technology, and we have tools, and we have equipment.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we apply that and make it efficient?
Yeah.
And you know, honestly, everybody I talked to, the architects and the builders, thought it couldn't be done, and that it was a fool's errand. But I'm pretty stubborn and decided to try it.
Yeah.
And as I got into it and got my first opportunities to execute timber frames, one of the things I discovered is that I actually needed an architect, you know, to design the buildings.
Yeah.
And I
Why is that?
Because there was no architect out there designing buildings to be timber frames.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I wanted to build them, which I wanted to do.
Yeah. And clients wanted to see a design, right?
They wanted to see a design, you know, I had to become an architect.
Yeah.
And, you
So
know,
it's just out of necessity.
just out of necessity, and, you know, I surely was not an architect.
Yeah.
But I relied on my knowledge of the old buildings and how they were designed. I used architects I knew from the area to kind of oversee my work. But by being pretty conservative in my designs, I could do it. You know, I could actually design and build. And so that defined our early days. I designed many buildings back then.
Yeah.
But pretty soon, I knew I needed the skills of an architect. And so in the mid-1980s, we hired an architect. And then
You replaced
another.
yourself.
I replaced myself with somebody better.
Yeah, that's what you do.
That's another story of the company.
Okay. But,
And then the same thing with a structural engineer.
yeah.
You know, a timber frame building is really a engineered timber structure. And so I also realized we needed, you know, engineering skills on staff.
Yeah.
And so the architect and the engineer were, you know, among our first hires on the professional side.
Okay.
So knowing that I needed help on the engineering and knowing that I needed help with architecture, we became a design build firm.
Yeah.
You know, out of necessity.
Yeah.
If we were going to revive the craft, we had to have those skills in-house.
Wow. So you've really been design build since you started, out of the practical, just necessity of being able to do what you wanted to do, and
Yes.
then you started to bring on others within the team almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? architects, engineers, separate. You stop doing the work at some point all the time in the field, I'd imagine.
Right.
And
And so, you know, all of those stories are finding people better than I was.
Yeah.
But also, becoming knowledgeable enough about that sector of the work to be able to kind of lift the company and design the company.
Yeah, right. You design, build your company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I want to get some things out. You know, we just talked a little bit ahead of time, and this guy is so ahead that he doesn't think with design build so much because it's inherent in him. The significance of that, I've kind of been talking, it doesn't really matter. He's just like, he's going for a product, and the product this guy is going for right now is really he's up here on this high level of trying to push the industry forward. And you mentioned that, I want to give this juxtaposition here of two things you mentioned to me. You said about, from just conversations with architects, you said about 20 to 30% of the buildings they design get built.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less, maybe it's more.
Yeah, maybe it's less,
whatever,
maybe it's more, but.
But compare that to you.
In conversations with a lot of architects, what you understand is that their fees are based on the design side.
Yeah.
And you know, that's really where their profession is embedded, and not necessarily on the build side. It's not.
Right.
That's not a necessary outcome.
Right.
And there are many reasons why projects get derailed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe the design didn't work out, maybe it didn't get permitted. The usual case is that it's over budget and doesn't get built, you know, for one reason or another. So I've heard from architects that, you know, 30% might be a pretty good number for the numbers of designs that actually get built.
Conversely, what is yours?
Yeah, ours is way above 90%.
Yeah. Why is that?
For the simple reason that in our design build structure here, we need the outcome to be a build. We need to satisfy the client on the quality of the design and also meeting their budget.
That's your product.
That's
It's a building.
You know, we need a building.
It's not a design.
As an outcome.
Yeah.
In fact, in our early era, we gave them the design.
Wow. Yeah.
Because all we really wanted was the build side of it.
Yeah.
So we did work on the front end to do the schematic design.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we signed a contract for the build, we already had a sense of meeting the budget, and we'd sign the build contract, and that's where we'd actually do the DD and CD work.
Okay.
You know, under the build contract.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then turn that into build, but we had to meet the budget, and we had to satisfy their design criteria.
Yeah. So you have these architects who are designers. That's their the profession of an architect is that of a designer now. But they're also you're on the cutting edge of technology, prefabrication, sustainable green design and build. And so are these architects. Like that's where in academia that's where that stuff is taught.
Yeah.
But on the builder side, conversely, you mentioned that the real the most resistance to this improvement on better way to build, this building science technology, are the builders, right?
Yeah.
And what do you see there?
The building profession, unfortunately, is a little bit stuck in the past, and it has to do with a few things. Number one, the industry is extremely fragmented. You know, the builders I told you that I worked with who did everything from foundation to furniture.
Yeah.
You know, now it's 25 trades.
Yeah.
And they don't even talk to each other in the process. So if you were going to change something dramatically about the typical build process, how do you communicate with all those different entities that this is a different thing, this is a different process, this is a different product, and you want a different outcome.
Right.
So the industry is really resistant to change simply by its structure. Simply,
Yeah. The fragmentation of it.
the fragmentation really in itself resists change.
Right.
Because there's just too many
Right.
entities to communicate with.
Yeah.
And if you want to create change, you almost need a design build structure
You do.
in order to execute.
Right. Because you need to have somebody responsible,
Yeah.
which has that team under him, but is actually accountable
Right.
for that product. And that right there, that statement is the essence of design build. And it's the only reason, and it's intrinsic in this man and what he's trying to achieve, because it has to be. The same reason he started to design is because his product was a building. It's intrinsic in a building. And that's what I see, and
Yeah.
just want to point that out.
I think it's also really important to understand that a successful design build culture depends on mutual respect, and so in our structure here, where we have architects and engineers and project managers, and administration, kind of the professional side, and we have woodworkers and building systems experts and building scientists and the people who actually execute the work. The mutual respect is embedded in that process.
Why is that?
And because the architects also understand that the people executing the work are saving the day, so to speak. They're actually going to make it happen.
They're helping them. They have a component which they're bringing to the table that they don't necessarily have.
Yeah.
And converse the same thing the other way around.
So an architect can be telling a client, we can do this, whatever that complex, difficult, finished detail might be.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah.
Not because he can do it,
Right.
because we can do it.
That's powerful.
And it's really powerful.
Yeah.
And so the respect, that the people, the woodworkers and the building systems people, actually building the structure have for the architects is there too.
Yeah.
They need them in that creativity
that's
and
awesome.
that design side and that design execution. But, the professionals need the execution on the craft side.
Yeah.
And so
And it's different.
that's a critical part of
It is, and it's different than what folks have come to know as the traditional setup where it's separated, because that breeds more of instead of this teammanship and respect, it breeds more adversarial relationship, because they're not a team, basically. The client's hiring one and then another separate, and if there's any discrepancies, only the greats, and I think you've experienced this, there are those architects and those builders who are they just want the product, and so they know they need to collaborate, but it's not set up that way.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's not set up that way.
Yeah.
A little funny thing to point out.
Yeah.
I'm a carpenter. At least I still think of myself. In my fond self-analysis, I hope, I hope I'm still an architect, or a carpenter. And we have really good craftsmen in this company. I mean, really skilled, talented craftsmen at all levels. And I would point out to them that the architects aspire to be carpenters more than the carpenters aspire to be architects. Because they can see the joy of the craft and the self-fulfillment of having spent a day doing something and looking at it.
Yeah.
And architects need that too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's my background, is really, I had a void for that, and I had to fill that.
But I don't see the carpenters actually aspiring to be architects.
But
so
I think also because they do have the opportunity to design some stuff, right?
Yeah.
Even in
the
like
details.
even within your own system, you mentioned that you have a plan,
Yeah.
and probably, even though it starts with the architect, engineer,
Right.
probably 50 people in your company touch it and have, impact on that, right?
And have a lot of control over actually what happens.
Yeah.
So I think, the closer you are to the work, honestly, the more satisfaction you get,
Mm-hmm.
from the work. And so I think that's why architects like to be close to the work,
Yeah. Yeah.
They're drawing all
Yeah,
day and
yeah.
creating ideas. They can actually go to the shop and see it happening and
Yeah.
take at least vicarious pleasure from it. And occasionally actually get to the site and
Yeah.
help with
Yeah.
assembly
Yeah.
and installation.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because as technology advances, I just toured Mr. Benson's prefabrication shop. It's incredible, but the lines between design and construction start to blur.
Yeah.
And as technology advances, that's going to continue. And I mentioned Mr. Peter Gluck, of which I'm very fond. Tours the country, speaks to a lot of architects and encourages them to get into design build. And what I've observed is a resistance to that. Like, they don't take the guy's advice as much as they should necessarily.
Yeah.
But you have developed a system that is a solution for, can you talk about that? Because it goes back to this point of the architects are the ones who are most primed to be able to do this.
Well, I do think that there's a solution for the industry in technology.
Mm-hmm.
With software that's connected to manufacturing components,
Mm-hmm.
architects can connect to that technology through the software, and therefore the building systems, whether they're structural systems or finish or mechanical systems that are embedded in the software, and almost without realizing it, they are a part of a design build process when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because
of the nature of the software?
Because of the nature of the software and because of the necessity that if the process is going to be efficient, the systems have to be embedded in the software.
Yeah.
And it's harder for an architect to recreate the systems that are going to be manufactured. They can tell a craftsperson on the site, this time I'm going to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
The next time I'm going to do it that way. But, when we're using software as a kind of a front-end method for more efficient, higher quality building, a lot of the solutions are in the software. And the software has the intelligence of the craftsman built into it.
It's all worked out into that. Yeah.
And
So
so
these
it's-
components are within that software, so it can be designed with those in mind. And
Exactly.
yeah.
So we actually work now with a lot of architects who are not a part of our company.
Okay.
Outside.
Through Tektoniks or Unity
Through,
Homes or both?
through Tektoniks and Bensonwood.
And Bensonwood. Okay.
Yeah. And they are actually a part of a design build process.
Yeah.
Because we are determining the building systems and the finished details
Yeah.
that we're going to execute.
Yeah.
It's their design, it's our building systems.
Yeah.
That makes it design build.
Yeah.
And they're telling us what the design criteria need to be. We're telling them, what the building systems solution will be to fulfill that design criteria.
Yeah.
And so that's very much the way things work in-house.
Yeah.
And because of that, the architects that tend to work with us come back.
Yeah.
Their job got a little easier. And,
Yeah. And
And-
then
and-
how is that project executed? That they designed using your components?
I mean,
Do you-
who is the builder?
Yeah. How's it executed?
So, several different ways.
Yeah.
But if we had done, for instance, the shell
Yeah.
and the millwork,
Yeah.
then there's an architect, then there's us doing a scope of work, and there might be a local builder.
Okay.
As
Cool.
kind of a triumvirate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And-
But the architect in that setup is able to really be the design builder,
Yeah,
right? You're
exactly.
you're empowering that
I'm-
architect to go beyond the typical, okay, this is, I'm done, or, you know, this person's now responsible to be able to see it through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens too, because that architect is telling their client, we can
Yeah.
execute
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
on time, on budget,
Yeah.
and the we that they're referring to
Yeah.
is us and them,
Yeah.
so we became
Yeah.
a design build
No, that's awesome.
entity.
Yeah.
And they knew that the we could execute the quality and the time and the budget that they,
And
you know,
that-
were representing.
Yeah, and that's incredible, because I feel like design is very powerful, right?
Yeah.
It can uplift you,
Yeah,
just in a space, you know,
Yeah.
as well as the use of it. That's the beauty of what we do. Is it's not just an art, but you use it.
yeah,
But if you can design at a high level and bring the accountability for cost and schedule,
yeah.
I mean, you could have the world, you know. Yeah. That's really like what design build is, just a win-win proposition. It's not just for the client; it's for the the team within it, because it's just, you know, part of how it's set up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a tease.
Okay.
So the tease is we're launching a new sector of the company in spring of 2020.
Okay.
And the idea of it will be our collaboration with two of the country's premier architects.
Wow.
And
Can you say it?
no,
Okay. All right.
but you'll know soon, and we'll start.
Man, that is incredible.
And
man.
so the idea is that with them, we'll extend this design build methodology, because they're designing the products.
Yeah.
These are kind of prefabricated products with lots of different configuration possibilities.
Wow.
And we're determining the building systems and the finishes with them.
Wow.
And so these will be kind of extending the design build concept,
Wow.
you know, kind of outside of our boundaries. So we've been working with them for almost a year now,
Wow.
developing, you know, a product concept to deliver to the market. It's
Yeah.
going to be quite high end.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we're calling the no compromise concept.
Okay.
It's called Open Home.
Okay.
And so it'll be the best of everything, and the things we think are missing in home building, for instance, passive house level performance.
So that's a standard.
That'll just be a standard
Cool.
embedded in it. And a health level of performance that we think nobody else has quite achieved
Wow.
in terms of air quality.
Yeah.
Will be embedded in
Wow.
it. Acoustic
That'll be able to be
performance.
measured within.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
cool.
monitored.
Wow.
So that, you know, so that homeowners know that their home is the safest place they can be.
Yeah.
And it should be that way. But this was a little bit inspired by the fact that we had some fairly wealthy clients who came to us because they're leaving a home that had such bad mold problems that one of their oldest son almost died
Wow.
from mold exposure. And, you know, that was in a high-end,
Yeah,
high-quality
probably beautiful
home.
home, yeah.
But, you know, these homes today have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of defects.
right.
You know, we talked about that too.
Yeah.
And those defects generally go to either structural problems or health problems as being, you know, the number one issue.
Yeah.
Or at least the issue that most affects homeowners.
Yeah.
And health is a really big one. That's often overlooked. I gave a talk in Seattle about 8 years ago, and the speaker before me was a physician, and he said that his expertise was with respiratory issues, and he said it was an epidemic
Wow. Yeah.
in the Seattle area. and that most often he treats people for respiratory problems and sends them back to where they got it, which is their home.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, the idea of this open home concept that we'll be talking about in the spring is no compromise in health, structure, craftsmanship,
That's,
energy performance, and we think that's where the industry is going to go.
yeah.
You know, kind of more embedded in a.
Thanks to you. Yeah. I wasn't lying on that intro. Yeah. It's beautiful. I mean, I just want to recap what this guy's doing. He's taking a segregated industry and bringing it together. He's taking architects who can design beautiful things, but don't think with the execution, and so you have a 20 to 30% build ratio of design projects. Then you have this build side of the industry, which doesn't give a shit about the energy efficiency and the things that you're just talking about, where somebody's son almost died or child almost died, and it's like that because they're segregated and they're disconnected, and he's bringing them together. And I just want to thank you again. It's really incredible. It's an honor to be able to speak to you, and yeah,
It's been good to have this conversation today.
Yeah,
Thank
awesome.
you.